Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm supposed to call the meeting back to order at 1 p.m. Isn't that great? And I can confirm we do have quorum. And with that, I do have one motion before I turn it over to Deputy Mayor Armour. I have a motion moved by Councillor Renwick, seconded by Councillor Morrison. It is recommended that committee suspend the rules of procedure related to speaking limits for the consideration of agenda items 9.1, Arvona Zwiers from the District Municipality of Muskoka, and 10.1.1, report number DV-2025-34, Housing Action Plan. And further that all rules of procedure will be reinstalled once the agenda item has been completed. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Mayor Armour.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and welcome, Arvona. Thanks for coming here today. We're at 9.1, so we have Arvona Zwiers from the District Municipality of Muskoka doing the DM Housing and Homeless Plans Initiatives. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And Chair Armour of this portion of General Committee meeting, and thank you also Mayor Alcock, and greetings and good afternoon members of General Committee. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm Commissioner of Community and Planning Services over at the district. That was probably part of my introduction, but I was distracted opening a juice box, so just thought I'd add that in now. I am here to focus in on the affordable housing and homelessness prevention activities that the district does. And I am hoping to take only maybe 10 to 15 minutes for my portion of this presentation. I'm hoping it gives a little bit of a snapshot that will be useful for you as you discuss the further item on your agenda. Okay, there we go. So the district's role in housing is largely underpinned under legislation of the Housing Services Act, in which we have a role of consolidated municipal service manager responsible for the housing system as well as homelessness planning. We also have a planning role, and this presentation and my content is going to focus really on housing and homelessness and not on the planning components. Even though I know that what Director Maxwell has put into the report that is being presented following this has a lot of planning tools, I really want to provide the context of what we do in the housing and homelessness system. We are a community housing owner and operator, which means that for some of our portfolio, we are a landlord. The District of Muskoka directly operates that community housing, and we also are the sole shareholder of the Muskoka Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation. Under our service manager responsibility, we have a responsibility to provide centralized waitlist management for rent-geared to income housing as prescribed under the legislation. The legislation means that we're also a funder. We flow through provincial and federal funding to projects, and we also have a significant municipal financial burden that we have under legislation and also under district council approval. Legislation also requires us to have a 10-year housing and homelessness plan, and all of these I'll be speaking to in greater detail in my presentation. As part of that, we have a responsibility for planning homelessness prevention services as well as delivering them. And because of council direction, we also have taken on the role of being a developer and a builder. Sorry. Whoops. Okay, there we go. So we have, as part of our legislative role, we have ongoing housing programs. And these are things that we have been doing for a couple of decades as programs have been launched through the province and have then come down to the district level for us to implement. And so some of these would include affordable home ownership programs. That would include the Gateway Home Ownership Program, which was based on a large donation made a couple of decades ago. And it is about affordable home ownership for low to moderate income households. We have an Ontario Renovates program to help families and households be able to sustain their housing. We have an additional residential unit or a secondary suites program. Those are our affordable homeownership programs. We have district-owned rental units. Again, we do waitlist management for rent geared to income, as well as waitlist management in our own role as landlord. We do tenant case management for our district-owned and our Muskoka Municipal nonprofit housing units. We have in recent years opened up Alex's Place, which is a transitional housing location. And as part of our role, we do property management. In the area of homelessness prevention and supports, we deliver the homelessness prevention program on behalf of the province. We use a motel shelter program. We don't have standalone shelters, but we have a motel system which allows us to expand and contract the service to meet the needs of people who are presenting as unhoused. We have case management in our homelessness prevention program to help people find and sustain housing, and we operate a by name list so that we can keep track of the people that we're serving. In the area of rent assistance, we have developed over the years our MAHIP rent supplement program, which is our Muskoka Affordable Housing Incentives Program. As part of that, the operating component to MAHIP includes rent supplements. We also deliver provincial rent supplement programs, and we also have a retirement home fee assistance program. So a number of these programs we were already doing in our role as service manager, in some cases for the past 25 years or even more. And in some cases, they've been more recent. Last year, we received approval for what we commonly call the Big Move on Housing. And the more formal name of this is the Affordable and Attainable Housing Investment Program. So we have 3 streams. We have the deepest need, which is just over 19 million up to about 25 million dedicated resources over the space of, to be allocated over the space of 5 years, but it's actually funded over 8 years. We have attainable market-based of about 8.5 million, and we have a capacity building stream in the area of 2 million. I'm going to refer down to my notes every once in a while to make sure that I'm not forgetting to say anything. The Big Move on Housing aligns with our District Council approved strategic plan and the related action plans. And it also aligns really well with Federal Housing Action Plan, which was approved a number of years ago by the federal government. And then the province builds their programs based on that as well. The Big Move on Housing really aims overall to leverage additional investment opportunities, public-private partnerships, innovative and green technologies, and includes a real focus on the provision of supports for our most vulnerable populations. So I'm going to drill down into each of the streams on a little bit more detailed basis. We know that in the deepest need stream, we know that there is a really dire need for shelter, including transitional shelter and supportive housing, as well as deeply affordable permanent housing all across the District of Muskoka. And that's why the District Council approved the allocation of 2/3 of our investment in this particular deep need stream to serve our most vulnerable residents and to create housing types that we not only have an obligation to provide in our service manager role, but that are likely, but that they're housing types that are not likely to be met through development in the private sector. The nonprofit sector is very interested in supporting the deep need of housing, and sometimes they need also the additional supports to be able to do so. So on this slide, there is a list of opportunities that have been contemplated as part of the deep need stream, and I'm going to expand on some of these specifics. I just want to draw your attention to the graphic at the bottom of the slide, which is the housing continuum. We have used this version of the housing continuum, which is based on Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The Muskoka Housing Task Force has reviewed alternative logos or graphics that we could use in place of a continuum, because we do actually recognize that people can bounce from somewhat permanent rental housing back into homelessness. It's not all one-way linear progress. People's lives change, and they can go in and out of homelessness or in and out of supportive housing or in and out of permanent housing, in and out of home ownership. And especially these days, there are a lot of fluctuating times. So this slide actually shows a picture of the affordable housing building that is coming up quite quickly out of the ground in Bracebridge at 100 Pine Street. We had originally submitted a funding application to Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation under the Rapid Housing Initiative Round 3, which was submitted still when we were in a pandemic, and we were unsuccessful at that time. The RHI program was dramatically oversubscribed, and we were one of the projects that were not approved. But we kept the designs, and we added to the designs, and we expanded from 29 units to 44 units as part of the design at the direction of District Council. And we are looking forward to completing this project late in 2025 with occupancy and final completion on the interior in early 2026. We, staff are exploring, again at District Council direction, the potential for acquisition of a number of different properties, most of which are subject to confidential reports, so I can't list those here. There have been recent District Council reports on Community and Planning Services Committee, which list in general the property acquisition projects that we've got underway, and they reference specific reports. But we aren't at liberty to share information about those publicly at this time. But I can acknowledge that in conjunction with the town of Bracebridge, who are issuing their RFP, have issued their RFP for development on the former Memorial Arena sites, we issued a letter which was used as an addendum to the RFP, saying we would work in partnership with the successful proponent and pending any District Council allocation of resources. We were extremely pleased to see the town of Huntsville's offer of the property on Chaffee Road, Chaffee Township Road. And we're looking forward to being able to start due diligence activities on that property almost immediately, including a phase 1 environmental assessment. And so we can determine the best use of that site, particularly because it is adjacent to a district-owned property, and there may be some synergies there that make a lot of sense. We are also doing a 5-year review of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure that Huntsville staff and also members of the Housing Task Force and probably members of CAPS Committee will receive requests to participate in the consultation process for that. That also includes a deeper dive into homelessness services so that we can see whether the recent rise in homelessness requires us to change tack on how we're delivering homelessness services. We are still moving ahead as District Council approval for our mobile outreach vehicle so that we can engage in a lot of very proactive outreach to all the corners of the district. And we are in process of establishing a transitional housing project, although I can't speak to the details of that publicly at this time, but we know that that kind of housing is very much needed. Remember to flip the slide over. There we go. In terms of the deep need, so potential projects over the next few years, we have had some consideration of motel conversion. We know we've got the Chaffee Township Road development. We are looking at intensification and redevelopment of our community housing stock, both the stock that's directly owned by the district as well as Muskoka Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation. And of course, we would work in partnership with any of the nonprofit housing providers that exist across the district as well. And we, again, are moving forward on a transitional housing project as we can. Moving into the second stream of the housing big move, we've got attainable market-based. And so, as mentioned, the goal for this stream is to actually increase the supply of more middle-of-the-road attainable housing supply, quite frequently in partnership with third-party providers or proponents. And so on this slide is a list of the activities that were really contemplated at the beginning of the Housing Big Move stream, including an expansion of our MAHIP, again, Muskoka Affordable Housing Initiatives Program, the capital incentives in particular for capital projects. And you might recall that we bumped up the amount that is available on a per unit basis from 80,000 per unit up to 100,000 per unit for in exchange for a commitment of an affordability period of 25 years. And when we made the change from 80,000 per unit up to 100,000 per unit, we immediately saw an oversubscribing to the MAHIP program. And in previous years, we've really tried to leverage reserves in order to be able to pay for additional units to be funded. We our window is open for MAHIP applications right now, and the window is closing for applications on April 13th. So all of the providers, all of the proponents who we have done business with in the past are aware of the process. We typically do reach outs to those providers, those proponents, and so we would regularly do business with them. And in fact, I think we've been having lots of conversations with them as they're putting together their packages. We are continuing to provide down payment assistance for home ownership. And I can tell you that after a couple of years in which we saw very few applications for affordable home ownership assistance, we, with the slightly reduced affordable home ownership resale price, we are seeing some more successful home ownership down payments. And in fact, we recently approved 2 in Huntsville. So I can, and they're actually quite low. I won't name the amounts, but I saw them and I thought this is good. People are able to enter into the home ownership market, and they're doing so at figures that my kids could afford. So the litmus test, and that's what any of us would want for our extended family, right? We also are promoting development concierge, and I was pleased to see that in the report that's coming to General Committee today, that is also mentioned. And we're looking at head leases and service agreement partnerships. Head leases were a topic of discussion a number of years ago. We opened an RFP process for head leases. We didn't get any takers. We're re-looking at that again and seeing if we need to open up how we ask about head leases. So stay tuned for that. Okay. I have already reviewed the MAHIP capital incentives, and we are looking at some future programs as well. Recently at Community and Planning Services, at the last committee cycle, we reviewed a report on DC rebates for first-time owners of new homes and how we could develop a program that mimics the home ownership program and/or Ontario Renovates to be able to provide DC incentives. And we are, again, considering head leases, as well as Lake of Bays did an interesting project where they considered an unopened road allowance, and we're looking at that to see what may be possible, although the purview of that is largely within the realm of the lower tier or the area municipalities. We've supported Muskoka Community Land Trust on a couple of different avenues, one with some pre-development financing or funding, and one in terms of ramping up their operations as an organization. We also have been revamping our secondary suites program, our additional residential unit program, and including revamping some of the marketing material with that. So we're always happy to work in partnership with our area municipal partners on those initiatives as well. Okay. In terms of the ARU program, there are 2 funding amounts that are available to homeowners who would like to create additional suites within their property. There's a $40,000 and a $50,000 program. And overall, the MAHIP program is growing. We have approval in the 2025 and 2026 district budgets for an increase year over year of MAHIP funding so that each year we can support more units to be created through multi-residential development. Our goal between 2025 and 2032 is to create 260 new units across the district through the MAHIP program. I can tell you historically that as of December 2024, a total of 30 projects across Muskoka have been funded under MAHIP. And this, of course, goes way back in time and predates the big move on housing approval. This goes back to the beginning of the MAHIP program. And those projects have been awarded just under $7 million over the years in 30 projects to incentivize over 120 affordable units across Muskoka. In Huntsville, this is what the picture looks like in Huntsville. 11 projects creating 71 units have been awarded MAHIP funding, totaling almost $3.7 million. So Huntsville, the market and the developer economy in Huntsville has been really receptive to working with the MAHIP program funding, and we appreciate any of the efforts that the town has made to work in partnership with us on that. So thank you for that. In terms of capacity building in the big move on housing, this is the one that was a little bit, no, quite a bit outside the box of what we would normally deliver in housing programs. And so the amount is only $2 million out of a $30 million project of over 8 years. But it really is about incentivizing the capacity within related sectors that will give effect to the creation of affordable housing. So almost immediately what that looked like was a partnership with Georgian College to help fund an expansion of their Bracebridge campus in which they can actually train more people in construction technologies. And those people will hopefully stay in Muskoka, be employed by our local developers, and create ongoing affordable housing. And so it's we see it as a win-win-win. It's a win for the local economy, it's a win for the sector, and it's a win for the college, and it's just a win all around. And then we know that there is remaining monies available in this stream, which will be allocated over the next few years to support similar types of innovation. The role of the Housing Task Force. So the Housing Task Force has served as a filter for a number of the potential projects under the capacity building stream, and that includes Georgian College. Georgian College, as their first port of call, made a presentation to the Muskoka Housing Task Force, which was really well received, and that opened the door to then coming to present to Community and Planning Services Committee and then receiving approval under the Big Move on Housing capacity building stream. We've also heard through the task force a number of other capacity building and/or innovative methods of built form. And the Housing Task Force recently revised its terms of reference, which I know sounds quite boring and dry, but the change in the terms of reference allows for the task force to have a more defined role in how it will receive proposals and projects and kind of filter that information up towards the Community and Planning Services Committee. The Muskoka Housing Task Force, which we're calling 2.0, because it's a nod of respect to the fact that there was a 1.0 Muskoka Housing Task Force, which really laid the groundwork for a lot of the original initiatives. We hosted an affordable housing service swap in November to mark National Housing Day. And just the other day, we were having a meeting, and we've decided to try and do the same thing again this year, turn it into an annual event. We had close to 80 people who were in attendance, all, probably about a dozen, providing their service information up at a panel at the front, and then an opportunity for people to go and talk with them and understand a little bit more about their pitch, understand a little bit more about how they're developing affordable housing and what their programs are all about. We received really positive feedback on that one. which is why we're going to try and plan another one for this year. And that actually wraps up the more formal part of my presentation. This slide is full of really tiny font. It really should work as linkages in your package, in the PDF that was provided to the town, that if you wanted to click on the links, you could learn some more information. So with that would include the original Big Move on Housing report, where you could see how it was laid out, the district's housing and homelessness 10-year plan, and a number of other resources in there as well. And I have not stuck to my script because I am challenged visually to read slides and speaking notes at the same time. But if I have overlooked anything, I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rona. That was excellent. Good presentation, and you got all the notes, I'm sure. Do we have any questions around from the committee? Mayor Alcock.
You could go to anyone else first. I actually, thank you, Arbona. It was obviously a great presentation. I do have a few questions, and I'm certainly happy to ask one and go wherever. So at the very beginning, you talked about homelessness prevention and supports, and we have a huge reliance on, as you said, the motel system. And obviously, it is a less than ideal way to service that community. And I just wanted you to expand, if you can, on how we are trying to transition away from that. And I think the word is transition. But maybe you could expand on how we're trying to make permanent transitional housing more readily available.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock, for that question, because that was before I took my glasses off. And actually, that reminded me that I did have some statistics that I wanted to share around the picture or the status of homelessness in Muskoka right now. The district undertook a point-in-time count, which is commonly called a PIT count, point in time, on last November. And the enumeration, it's an enumeration. We just count people. And they don't have to share with us their identity. That would be saved for something that we call the by name list. The point in time count is just a count. And we're striving to not have duplication, which is why we do it on one night. So last year, the enumeration revealed that there are 234 people across 153 households across Muskoka, including 27 children, who are homeless or living very precariously housed. They don't have a permanent roof over their head. This is an increase compared to 2018. This is an increase of 21%. It's an increase of 45% compared to 2021. But I would really rely more on the comparison to 2018, because that is a pre-pandemic number. And in my mind, that's a safer, longer term number to make a comparison on. In terms of Huntsville, I asked the staff to give me what the numbers were for Huntsville, because I figured that you would be interested in that. I don't have the point in time count specifically for Huntsville. What I do have is numbers of people served over the past month. So to date, this month, March, 22 individuals, 29 individuals representing 22 families or households, so some of them are obviously singles and maybe a few of them are pairs or couples, have been supported in Huntsville at 5 different locations with varying degrees of stays. So that would be presumably 5 different motel locations. We use the motel shelter system because it was a way 20 years ago, when homelessness was less of a presenting challenge to us, with many less homeless individuals. It was a way to house them rapidly, and the system has grown. Using the motels does allow us to meet the need in all the communities across Muskoka. It means we don't have to have a bricks and mortar shelter in one or more specific locations that may on any given night be underfilled while there's pressing demand, maybe in an area where there is no bricks and mortar shelter. So fundamentally, it allows us to expand and contract our services based on what the need is. Since the pandemic, although the numbers have increased greatly. What is more concerning to us is that the length of stay in the motels has lengthened exponentially. And that speaks to me that we might have seen an increase in homelessness, but the length of stay has increased, which means people aren't able to get out of homelessness and into affordable housing. And that's why we need the transitional and supportive housing. It's because the transitional is typically transitional up to 4 years, while staff wrap around somebody who is in a transitional housing location and can provide them with the learning of ongoing supports to be able to live independently in their own place. Supportive housing is where somebody goes into a permanent place and they are wrapped around with supports. And it may include a common kitchen and common living room area, as opposed to their complete self-contained bachelor or one-bedroom unit. So transitional and supportive housing are terms that are quite often used interchangeably, but they actually mean two different things, although they're quite similar. They involve lots of supports to help people learn how to live independently. Sorry, Mayor Alcock, that was a long answer, but I realized that there was some stats there that I had omitted.
And I appreciate that, because that was exactly what I was thinking about. And maybe not to, I don't want to dwell on this, but the reference to 24 Chafee, that might in fact be the kind of link that we're talking about. All right, thank you.
You can carry on, Your Worship, if you have more questions.
I do. You made reference to a program that we've heard the term before, and then at one point the district sort of considered the concept of entering into an agreement with the development community around head leases. And then it went away, and now we're back. And I think it's an important possible program to highlight as we consider here in our council entering into agreements with multi-residential developers. I think it's important that we all understand what a head lease might look like and what role the district might play in that.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock, for that question. A head lease arrangement can look very different in different contexts. So in some large GTHA regions, a head lease arrangement might involve an entire building or several floors within one large multi-residential building. And it's basically an arrangement where the owner of the building, so the landlord or the proponent, the developer, has a lease arrangement with a middle entity. In this case, it could be the district. And then the district, or that middle entity, I'm trying to not say middleman, that middle entity would then have sublease arrangements with subtenants. So what does that do? It means that a proponent can develop a building, but then not have to have responsibility for ongoing property management and landlord-tenant issues and so on. And for an entity like the district, who has a wait list for rent geared to income housing that actually equals the number of rent geared to housing units that we actually own, what it means is that we have maybe a more rapid mechanism by which we can serve people. But then there also has to be an understanding of, well, who does the property management for that location? And who does the rent collection? And who, like, is there case management provided for tenants who lived there or not? And so in an area like Muskoka, a head lease arrangement may not be an entire building or may not be a whole floor. It may be a handful of units comprising a third of a building or 20% of a building. And that may be the economy of scale that makes a head lease arrangement more workable for Muskoka, given the fact that our population is so spread out with 3 towns and 3 townships. And again, we're open to considering what that might look like. I want to be really clear, I don't have council direction to enter into a head lease program, but it is safe enough to say that this has come up on the discussion horizon a few different times, and we are, as staff, figuring out how we can funnel through an information gathering process to see what is scalable here, what would work for the business community, the development community, and are all of these things a match where our regional government, the district with its council, can feel like it can commit to getting involved? I'm hoping that that's a really clear definition, and at the same time recognizing there's a lot of gray area in the whole head lease discussion.
I appreciate I appreciate that, because as I said, I think that our chair has had several discussions with, there seems to be some interest in it again, which I think is really useful. So we'll be coming back to the task force, my guess, fairly soon. But that one I just wanted to, I had one other question, but if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's my last, but the Affordable Home Ownership Program for the first-time home buyers, I can't remember, I should know this. Does it apply to just new homes? Or does, if a couple or whoever, it's their first home, but it's an existing home, do they qualify?
It applies mostly to resale. It is, so the Gateway Home Ownership Program is modeled after federal, provincial funded home ownership programs, which typically lends itself well to resale homes. And there is a maximum value, and it is set by it is set by some Statistics Canada and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation data on anywhere from 70 to 90% of the value of average resale homes. And so there's a set maximum value of the house, and that's why it lends well to resale homes as opposed to new homes. It's more difficult to make it work for new home purchases. And then there's also a household income limit of the 60th decile of household income. And these are all produced in annual tables under the provincial policy statement. So we have reliable data that we rely on for this. And I mentioned in the presentation the development of a new development charges first-time home buyer forgivable loan program. And that has it has not yet been approved by District Council, but it has gone through Community and Planning Services Committee. And that program would focus on new homes.
Excellent. Councillor Schumacher.
Thank you. Through you, Chair to Arfona. The wait list you guys manage, I worked for community living, both Huntsville and Bracebridge at one point, and it was like 7 or 8 years, and that was like 15 years ago. I'm assuming it's pretty static at about the same, because by the time people come on, others get off, but is that where we're looking at?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Schumacher. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me. In general, we have a number of wait lists. So the wait list that we are required to have under legislation is the wait list, centralized wait list for all the housing providers under the Housing Services Act for rent geared to income units. And we have 686 housing units in the community housing portfolio as listed under, no, they're not all listed under legislation, under 686 units in our system that we manage or own directly. Our wait list for rent geared to income housing is under 600. It's probably just about 590 or 600. And so across the province, that's what you will find in a lot of regional government areas, is that whatever number of housing units they have in the housing system, it kind of matches the number that are on the centralized wait list for rent geared to income housing. That's just an anecdotal observation. It doesn't mean that we're better or worse than anybody. It's just, it puts it into context. We also have a wait list for the district-built affordable housing units. We don't keep a wait list for the units under MAHIP that have been created by our local developers. They keep their own wait list. We keep wait lists for the district created affordable housing units. And so when we combine the RGI wait list and the affordable housing wait list, we're in the neighborhood of 900. 934, I think, are the numbers that we brought to the Roma conference, but it's in the neighborhood of 900.
Go ahead.
Just follow up, you're saying about the hotel stays longer. do you think a lot of that too has, again, obviously not finding affordable housing when ODSP is $1,328 for a month? And how does somebody find rent in Muskoka for that and still be able to afford groceries and essentially live?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. And in addition to those amounts under ODSP, Ontario Works single is $733, including basic needs allowance and shelter amount. I don't know how people living on social assistance are able to secure housing. Which is why we're seeing increases in homelessness in the face of rising rents.
So, yeah, go ahead.
And I guess that's the other thing, because again, my day job is also in this sector, in the passport funding portfolio. So people do finally maybe get an apartment, and then they need, I know you guys used to have the old C-sub, and then it's become the Chippy program under there, just to even, buy those like things to get their apartment started. And they want to tap into our funding, which, the province has different needs around, no, you can't tap into this, you have to go to there. Are you guys still able to create that opportunity for people who finally get a startup?
Thank you for that question, because that's another piece of my speaking notes that I obviously glossed right over. Part of our homelessness prevention program is what we call Housing Stability Fund. And yes, you are correct. We use homelessness prevention funding that we receive 100% from the province of Ontario for the purpose of helping people get into an apartment, helping people sustain their rental accommodation. There are rules, people can't come back in on a revolving door basis, but if somebody's got hydro arrears, we can help them once every year or once every 2 years. And we also work in partnership with community nonprofit organizations to deliver a program that we call Financial Assistance Partners Group. And it's where everybody, like the Salvation Armies that we work with and a number of other organizations, they put money into the pot. And with our case management staff that we have within the district, we allocate funding on behalf of agencies, which actually is quite efficient and helps streamline work processes, particularly for the nonprofit organizations that we work in partnership with.
Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Armour, and through you, and thank you, Arvona, for all the stuff that you're doing for our communities. I have one question, but I want to piggyback on something when you mentioned the lists. There's 2 separate lists. Are there any duplicate names on those lists?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. And yeah, there would be, which is why when I give the approximate number of 900, that's not duplication. Okay, so if I were to tell you the number for the RGI and the number for the affordable housing, you would come up with a number that is greater than 900, but the combined is in the neighborhood of 900. Yeah, and I'll just hasten to add that those are numbers that we retrieved in January in preparation for the Roma conference, and so they were probably numbers based on December of 2024.
Follow-up, go ahead.
And the other question you'll see from Director Maxwell's report later on, looking at developing a secondary plan for the north of Huntsville and whatnot. To your knowledge, is there any discussion right now, and maybe Mayor Alcock would know from being chair of CAPS, of expansion of water and sewer infrastructure into any certain areas in our town so that we can further service new areas of development?
I would have to take that question back to Commissioner of Engineering and Public Works.
And I can follow up with him as well, just curious.
Any other questions around? I have a couple, actually. The MAHIP program, I think it's amazing. I think it works well. I see it happening here in Huntsville and across the district. I'm just wondering what happens if someone signs up for the MAHIP program and doesn't fulfill their part of the contract, whether building or going half through, or not even putting a shovel in the ground? What happens to that funds then?
Thank you, Committee Chair Armour, for this portion of agenda. We have a number of different tools that we put into place. And so all of our programs are created with the perspective of making things as easy as possible for people who are living with low to moderate incomes, and at the same time protecting the public purse. And so we have staff within our housing programs team whose responsibility it is to monitor very carefully the building of projects when they're underway. And so as an example, the MAHIP capital incentives, similar to federal provincial funding under multi-year or even single-year housing programs, we would allocate the funding in a, oh, I've been away for too long, 50%, 40%, 10%, and then hold back. So 50 minus hold back, 40 minus hold back, final 10% upon completion minus hold back, and then hold back, the final hold back allocated to proponents at the after a certain amount of time has passed in which we know the building is secure. And then they have to demonstrate that they have leased out to people who meet, who have rents allocated at an amount that is no higher than our set maximums. Every year, we do an audit exercise. It's more than an audit. It's a proactive reach out to all the proponents to have them declare to us that they continue to be compliant with the program. We have had, unfortunately, a few MAHIP allocations where we have entered into an agreement to issue funding, and then partway through the project, the proponent has not been compliant, either from a timeline perspective or from a meeting milestones perspective, and we pull the money back with interest. And it goes into reserve. And sadly, when it has also involved federal provincial funding, we then are on the hook to return that money back to the province. And that is the missed opportunity. Because with the MAHIP funding, we can put it back into reserve, but with the provincial funding, we actually have to earmark it to give it back to the province. Yeah.
I guess the worst part about that, people trying to use the MAHIP money to front their building and then not following through on the contract at the end of the day. Councillor Renwick?
Thank you, Chair Armour, and thank you for the presentation. And I think my question is really a follow-up on what you just mentioned as well, that here we are relying on developers and builders to, through the incentives that we're offering through the MAHIP and even through the federal government, the Housing Accelerator Fund, how can we rely on profit-driven developers to solve our problem? And it just makes me nervous to think that they're in it really to make money. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So we very much provincially as well as federally, we rely on this, and obviously in the district as well. So I mean, I don't know if there's a question in there, but how can we rely on profit-driven developers to solve this problem when it's really, they're looking out for their best interests in so many ways?
Thank you, Councillor Renwick. I will actually put a plug in for some of our local developers who do this because they care about their community. Yeah, they're making a nice nest egg for their future family security from a financial perspective, but they also are building units that are modest and of simple design, and it doesn't mean they're any less quality, but they're simple design and they're modest in size and footprint. So we have some great developers that we work with locally, several of them here in Huntsville, and I would be remiss if I didn't comment that, but I do understand the nature of your question, because we also have heard from a lot of developers about why can't we do anything more about affordable housing? And then at the same time, they're building, one-bedroom units that are 1,200 square feet with 2 bathrooms. And that is not generally the type of housing that people living with low to moderate incomes need to see. And so you are correct. There are very few private developers who will see the return on investment outcome that they want from building modest, less expensive housing. And entering into lease agreements with people for 25 years. Like, that is the reality, is there's a 25-year or a 20-year commitment for certain other amounts of funding less than $100,000. That is actually why District Council was so focused on that stream number 1, which is the portion of the market that the private development sector is not as likely to be engaged with. And that also happens to be the sector where we need supportive and transitional housing, as well as very, very modest, very plain multi-residential apartments.
Follow up?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you for that answer. And it is a difficult, and I agree, there are developers that are doing a fabulous job. And I guess the more reading that I've done, the fact that you're talking about small, modest homes, there was a time when our government did wartime housing, and they were almost like a cookie cutter kind of a house. And they worked. Is that something that the district, I mean, I'm not asking if the district would build homes, but why we're putting in 19 to 24 million dollars in the deepest need? The deepest need is building homes. We need homes, small, modest homes for these people that they don't have. So maybe it's a bigger question. It's provincial, it's federal. The district, I think, is in on this as well, to talk about it. Wartime homes, yeah.
I'd actually be really happy to answer that question as well, Councillor, and thank you. And my first home that I owned was built in 1953, post-war, 1.5 story, 2-bedroom, no more than 1,000 square feet, original furnace, which was 3 years older than me at the time, which makes it very old now. And that house is still standing in Toronto, and it's still in a neighborhood where they haven't torn everything down and built monster homes. And it was the only avenue into home ownership for our family at that time in our lives. And so those, and they were all part of like typical 1.5 story designs, like bungalows and 1.5 stories that were created at that time. I know, reading Director Maxwell's report and contributed to by the rest of the team as well, that there are elements in that report which speak to that kind of standardized design. We've had those discussions also at the Muskoka Housing Task Force, and we had similar types of discussions at the service swap that took place back in November. So we're absolutely on board for that kind of initiative. It could be that our secondary suites program, the ARU program, is able to dovetail nicely with a program that has commonly accepted floor plans for secondary suites, maybe a secondary suite built over a garage or something similar, and that we are able to fast track those because the designs are already approved, and maybe local building construction material stores are selling the materials in bulk that are needed to create several of them at one time. So their district has not had an approved program as that, but I know that we would be very willing to work in partnership and bring something like that to our CAPS committee and council.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Chair Armour, and thanks, Sarfona, for coming, sharing with us. You talked about audits of buildings or builders that were in the programs. Are we incentivizing them to continue with the program when they come to an end, or are we losing some properties along the way?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. In the early years of the MAHIP program, the length of affordability, the timeline was much shorter. And that's because the funding allocated was much smaller. So the MAHIP program was originally founded on cost recovery for the developer of development charges. And so their units might have been required to stay affordable for, I think, 7 years. Some of them have met their dates, but that may not be a bad thing because the return on investment has been received by the people who are living locally. And then the bottom line is that built form continues to be modest in size and continues to serve a role in the community. We have found that longer term affordability periods is better return on investment for local households. We have had a few people finish their projects and then bail after a few years. And we saw a couple of those really small, like maybe a duplex or something. We saw a couple of those during the pandemic when prices just like flew, and we hadn't baked into our agreements as strong a protection terminology as we would have now. we've baked into our agreements much stronger protection and wording.
It was advantageous for them to pay the penalties and, yeah. Further, so my interpretation of the way MAHIP is working, you're looking for bigger projects in the communities and, 6, 20, 30 units. And it seems they're harder to come by and they take longer to get off the ground. I'm wondering if we do come up with some kind of semi or quad type development, that we focus more on those, because it seems to me they're going to happen a little quicker and they're going to reduce in numbers at a greater rate. So and maybe I'm mistaken in my thought process there, that I feel that they're giving them the money to bigger projects as opposed to smaller projects. We might get more builders involved is what I'm suggesting.
Thank you for that question. I don't have in front of me a breakdown over, say, 2024 and 2023 and 2024 about the number of projects and how big they were. Off the top of my head, I know that the eightplex, not far from here, that was built last year, was very scalable to Huntsville. No elevator. One bedroom apartments or bachelor, one bedrooms, I think. Identical footprint and, 2 stories. So it's as simple as a type of structure as you can possibly do. And that would be scalable if you increased it to 10 or 12 units, or if you decreased it to 4 to 6 units. That could be scalable for really small parcels of land, or with the district perspective, for townships or more rural areas within the towns. And so everything's about scale. And yet at the same time, we also know that we do need some buildings that need to have elevators, because we have to be able to meet the needs of people as they age in place, and that or if they have accessibility challenges and need a little bit of extra support. So we try and build barrier free where we can, and then have elevators in some of those buildings, like the one in Bracebridge on Pine Street.
Yeah. One more follow-up. Thanks for that.
Go ahead.
I just think we'd end up with more players in the game if we could focus or at least communicate that we are entertaining the semis or extremely small homes on, there's lots that could be created that will house 2 400 square foot units or 3 400 square foot units. We just make sure that we're reaching out to those potential developers and not even developers, we can create new ones if they're aware that these programs are available. And in fact, we are funding smaller stuff like that.
Thank you, Councillor, for that suggestion. And I would, if you know of small developers who want to create small structures that have very few units in them, and they have felt like they can't approach us, please, by all means, encourage them to approach our staff, because we evaluate each project on its own merit, and it comes down to what is the cost per unit, what are the needs that are going to be met, what are the commitments that are, for partnerships with nonprofit organizations that might be able to offer support services in a building, all sorts of things we take into consideration. And now that we're I can't say we're oversubscribed for 2025 because the window hasn't closed yet, but when we're oversubscribed, it does mean we get to choose the most quality projects, and those don't necessarily have to be the largest projects. Thank you.
Excellent. I have one you may not be able to answer, but one of the things we hear all the time when we're out talking to developers, et cetera, about building apartments or affordable, they talk about landlord-tenant act and how that's so restrictive to them, and they get bad tenants and they end up losing money. Do we have any pull with that, or can you go to AMO or something like that and discuss something like that?
Thank you for that question, Chair Armour. So we have, over the years, stakeholder associations like Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association, like Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and like Ontario Municipal Social Services Association, so those would be ones that we work with quite regularly. They would have had conversations with the province to advocate for changes to the Landlord-Tenant Board. During the pandemic, we saw a real backlog of hearings being held at the Landlord-Tenant Board, virtually or I mean, they were halted in person altogether, but even virtually, they weren't being held, to the detriment of both landlords and tenants, because there are, good and bad stories on all sides. I understand that the LTB has hired more adjudicators to oversee the process and to make progress in that process. If you talk to a landlord who's had a really bad experience, you'll get a certain perspective. And if you talk to a tenant who's had a really bad experience or has been evicted for not a plausible reason, you'll also hear some really bad stories. And so we have to understand that there is a continuum of responses on all sides. What we have found to be really successful is a program called Rent Smart. And for a few years, we funded the running of Rent Smart under our homelessness prevention program. The organization that delivered that program didn't deliver it for a couple of years. And now the Housing Transformation Center, which is a national center, but with Ontario offices as well. The Housing Transformation Center has taken on the Rent Smart program and is revamping it. If a person goes through the Rent Smart program, they come out of it with their certificate. They can show the certificate to a prospective landlord, and the landlord can be reassured that the person with the certificate has taken the course on how to be a good tenant. And there's also a component for landlords on how to be a good landlord. And for landlords, I'd say always the advice would be if the landlord is identifying an issue, don't let it go. Early intervention. Early intervention if there are concerns with the care and maintenance on the interior of the unit. Early intervention of working with the tenant to try and get at the nub of that. Maybe the tenant needs support services from related nonprofit organizations in the community in order to sustain a successful tenancy.
I don't see any other questions. This is your turn then to give us the pitch on how people can access these programs you're talking about.
Thank you. So the district website, we have overhauled the housing and homelessness website pages, and I think there is a link on the final page. There certainly is to our housing and homelessness plan, and I think there's so wherever you have the link to the housing and homelessness plan, you'll have the link to the MAHIP programs as well. And if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to have yourself or your local constituents or Huntsville staff reach out to myself or any of my team. We welcome any inquiries. Thank you.
That's excellent. So hopefully everybody who's listening today or going to be watching this later will follow through if you're a potential developer or builder. Mayor Elcock.
Thank you, Chair Armour. I just quickly wanted to say, Arvona, thank you for your presentation today because there were so many questions clearly. We're a very engaged council, and I think it's given us a lot of food for thought as we start talking about our own possibilities around this table. So thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you, committee.
Okay, we're going to move right on to number 10, divisional reports, 10.1 development services, 10.1.1. Kirsten Maxwell is here with report number DEV 2025-34, the Housing Action Plan. And I do have a motion with this. It's moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Renwick. It's recommended that staff be directed to implement options 1 through 17 as outlined in the report DEV 2025-34. Kirsten.
Thank you, Chair Armour. I thought I would start off with just sort of a recap of the housing needs assessment that we had received in December and some of the information that was provided. So based on all of the data collection that had happened, more than 1/3 of our population is aged 60 and above, and it's the fastest growing demographic group in Huntsville. And more than half of our population currently is earning less than the median income across the province. Lower average incomes are not reflected in housing prices, obviously, nor the forms of housing that have been created over the past few decades, being single-family detached dwellings. 80% of our current housing stock is single-family dwelling, and we have notable deficiencies in 1 and 2 bedroom units. 26% of our households are living in unaffordable, inadequate, or unsuitable housing, and our rental market vacancy rate is 0. So there's very limited housing options available, especially for non-market and supportive units, as you heard Commissioner Zwires as well. To encourage affordability, we need to shift from large single-family detached dwellings to more compact forms of development. And that's basically what the Housing Action Plan is going to focus on, is multi-res and rental units, so that we're looking at addressing our greatest need. The other items that are being implemented by staff currently outside of the Housing Action Plan are the ongoing work on the heightened density project with planners. We're looking at an amendment to incorporate the alternative rural lot standards. I know that's been discussed a few times, and that there are a lot of questions still remaining with those that proposed official plan amendment. The report is scheduled to be reviewed at the next planning committee in April, and I think that it would be a good idea to hold off on that aspect specifically, because we're going to talk about that at Planning Council. And then as well, staff are working on background work for the upcoming secondary plan for Huntsville North. So that's the lands north of Highway 60. More stats. In 2024, planning staff assisted proponents with approvals or ongoing work on 83 low density, 99 medium density, and 219 high density units. Not all were approved. Some are still going through the planning process, but that was just for 2024. From a growth perspective, in the urban area, we currently have approved developments comprising 1,900 units, with another 700 going through the approval process. The majority of those are single-family dwellings. And in our rural area, we have approximately 1,000 vacant lots that would be considered buildable. The growth strategy that the district completed last year notes that we would need 168 dwelling units annually, with just over half of those being in the form of single-family units or single-family dwellings, and that we should continue to work with developers to specifically expand the supply of medium and high-density housing options. So staff are recommending action items that are maintaining the vision of Huntsville as approved through the strategic plan and our official plan, and ensuring that the community is well-positioned for growth for the future. And so the action plan, we're focusing on multi-res and rental housing, and not on other forms of development. And the items that we're proposing can all be completed or implemented with existing staff resources. And some of them I think are exciting. I hope you guys do too. But so the first couple of options were appointing a planner as a concierge for multiple residential developments. So in essence, the staff person would liaise with internal and external agencies and assist whoever the proponents are in the development process so that it could be completed as efficiently as possible. With this type of an initiative, staff would be looking for council support if other forms of development were going to be delayed at all, if we were focusing on multi-res. The next few items are talking about secondary residential dwelling units, which we also call accessory residential units, or there's a lot of different terms, but for all of our policies, it's SRDU. So there's a lot of opportunity to increase our rental housing stock with more SRDUs. And similar to the multi-res concierge idea, a staff member could be appointed as a concierge for that type of development. We thought that it would be a great idea to do a procurement for structural drawings so that we could have a stock of pre-approved building plans for detached garages with an SRDU above it, or a standalone building that contained an SRDU, and with a few different sizes. The plans could then be made available to anybody that wanted to construct an SRDU at a reduced fee, as the town would own the plans. And then as part of that same idea, we could also promote awareness of these options and how you could implement these units through a marketing campaign. And we'd like to coordinate with the district on that as well, because they have a lot of information that they're working on from an SRDU aspect too. Another thing we were proposing is a community planning permit bylaw amendment that would permit 2 SRDUs in a detached structure on rural lots. I know we had the discussion several times about how the Planning Act was written, about where they're allowed to be and where they aren't. We think that we could do it in rural areas. In In the urban core, it's a lot harder for us dealing with our terrain and our existing lot sizes and the existing forms of development with the houses in their locations, that to have 2 units in a detached structure, it might cause compatibility issues. So from a blanket sort of CPP bylaw amendment perspective, we're more comfortable doing it in the rural area. We could also implement amendments to the CPP bylaw and our short-term rental accommodation bylaw. I know there was a discussion actually during Manager Nagy's report about SDRAs in the strike system. It's something we could look at changing the bylaw so that we could have the strikes, fewer strikes before a license is repealed as sort of a disincentive to have an STR on a property. We can't increase the fines associated with the STRs because that's, our fines can't be punitive. They just have to be to encourage compliance. But the other thing we could do through that bylaw is prohibit someone, a new owner, to obtain an SDRA license until they own the property for a year. So that's something that we could look at implementing too, as well as removing from the zoning provisions the ability to have an SDRA in our urban residential low precinct. So urban residential low is basically Huntsville proper, the majority of lots. From a development charters perspective, we weren't recommending that any changes be implemented because we do have quite a few development charge exemptions that are applied automatically. So no DCs are payable for secondary residential dwelling units. DCs are exempt through legislation when the purchase price is below the market-based and income-based thresholds. And DCs for affordable rental housing are exempt if the unit is considered affordable for a period of 25 years. Additional reductions are also in legislation that for market rental housing, based on the size of the unit, the number of bedrooms, the DCs are reduced anywhere from 15 to 25%. The next option was dealing with our affordable housing policy. So currently, we provide a rebate of building and planning related fees for development that qualifies based on their MPAC assessed values. The program could be further enhanced by reviewing those thresholds with an income-based affordable definition, which would align with the provincial DC bulletins. And so then that would keep everything up. We're considering them all under the same umbrella. In addition, other fees could be added to our affordable housing policy rebate program, including entrance permit fees, perhaps cash in lieu of parkland, or cash in lieu of parking if it's required for a development. For rental and affordable rental development, Council could direct staff also to investigate implementing a tax increment grant policy, which could provide a grant equal to the difference in tax levied on a property between what it's existing at and what it would be as a result of the development that's going in. And that could encourage larger scale investment rentals by deferring through grants all or a portion of the increase in taxation. We have to note as well, though, that any grants or increases in rebates will result in a benefit for the housing provider that would need to be funded from the municipal side through either an increase to property taxes or if we could fund them through an alternative revenue source like we do with the MAT currently. The next item was pre-approved duplexes and or semi-drawings, building permit drawings, that we could look at obtaining drawings along that type of a development as well. Suggest to reduce parking requirements for multiple residential and affordable rental development. Right now, our multiple residential parking requirement is 1.25 spaces per dwelling unit, plus 1 parking space for every 5 units for visitors. What we could do is reduce that down to 1 space per dwelling unit. And if it's an affordable rental unit, we could reduce it even further. We're suggesting 0.75 spaces per unit. And I know during the discussion about reserves this morning, we were also talking about parking cash in lieu, which currently every parking space that a developer is deficient, we could be requesting they pay $7,500 for. So that would be a significant rebate if someone was looking at that too. Next option was permitting 4plexes as of right on urban service lots. Currently, we allow 3 units, 1 dwelling unit and 2 accessory secondary residential units. In the urban area, we could look at doing 4 on a lot. as noted with the secondary residential units, our developed form is challenging, but if we were looking at reducing the size of the units so that the built form is still compatible with the neighboring lots, we think that would be feasible, and then it wouldn't overdevelop any of the lots. In rural areas, it's a bit more complicated because of the on-site well and septic systems and then those additional costs that would be required. And there's also limitations on all of the municipal services that are provided to the rural area, like transit and emergency services. But we could explore also implementing it in our communities, unserviced communities, as well as if we wanted to look at very site-specific options for staff housing, for areas where it's appropriate to have that additional density because there's an existing business-related component, we could look at that. The next couple of items are all OP policy amendments. We could incorporate affordable housing targets for all new residential development of 10 or more units and require that a minimum of 25% of the new housing be constructed so that it met building code requirements to permit secondary residential dwelling units within the building, not finished, but have all of the plumbing roughed in and all of the requirements for fire safety separations incorporated. We could permit residential uses to be allowed in employment areas like the regional commercial designation, which is Muskoka Commerce Park. We could tighten up policies to further restrict the conversion of multiple residential rental buildings to condominiums. Right now, we do have a program or a policy that says it has to be approved by council, obviously, but we could look at changing the wording a bit to make it a bit more restrictive. And then we could also, in areas where we talk about encouraging different housing forms, we could tighten up the wording and say it's required, so that that gives planning staff more teeth when they're talking to things with developers. The final item I was going to highlight is that although we have in our affordable housing policy currently rebates for tiny homes that they qualify, we could look at exploring more incentives for smaller units. It's a bit more complicated because we don't have any monitoring set up right now, but it's something that we could look at and identify how that would be funded through the budget process. And the one thing that I didn't have on my list, because it's a given, but I thought I should say it still, is working with the district on any programs they're doing, any way that we can help support or incorporate anything into what we're doing. And the one, Richard and I actually were chatting while our phone was doing a presentation about head leases. We talk about community benefits through the planning process when someone wants increased height or density, and then they're providing a community benefit. We think we could look at exploring if one of those community benefits could possibly be a certain number of the units going through a head lease program or something like that. So, what I've proposed through the report are things that I think we can accomplish over the next several months with our existing resources. And I am happy to answer any questions and have a discussion about any other suggestions that you might have.
Great report. Great synopsis. Love it. We have questions around the table. Councillor Morrison.
I'll sort of have a bunch of comments and questions, but I won't do them all at once because it'll take too long. We'll go around.
Okay.
So I'll get to a couple of them. I support all of it. The amount of work you put into this is amazing. I love that the key word in this is action. We're taking action. We're not just talking about stuff, which is awesome. The first one, I support all of the ones you want to put forward. I guess the one I'm having trouble with is number 1 and 2, just because we might have to add staff. I don't know right now with our budgets that we've passed if we would have the room to add staff members currently. So that'd be the ones I'd be hesitant about. And the question on I'll start with one question. The fourplexes, I'd love to see us explore having them as a right in both urban and rural. I look at Seguin Township, they built 5 apartment buildings on septics and wells, works just fine. I know of somebody who owns 2 pieces of land right now where they would build 2 fourplexes tomorrow if they could. And I've asked them to reach out because maybe there's a way. I think if we did allow them in the rural land, it would have to be minimum lot sizes, maybe increased setbacks, certain size units. Like my neighbor next door has a fairly big house. I'd have no problem with that being 4 one-bedroom units next door to me. You know, it'd be probably less noisy. Wouldn't be as many kids running around. Probably not as many dogs, but it'd be maybe 4 seniors living on the property. And then with that, we could encourage it to just be one bedrooms or bachelors, and maybe make it that at least one unit is affordable. So if you're going to get the fourplex in the rural land, one of them has to be affordable, otherwise we're not going to allow it. So that's on the fourplexes, and then I'll close with one and I'll come back. But the short-term rental, I love that we're looking at that. The idea of having to own it for a year is great. It's less parachute owners coming in from out of town that have no connection to our community. Most of the complaints you guys all get, and I do, is from absentee owners that have no connection to Huntsville. They don't care. I wonder, could we go further? Could you make it so that if we're going to grant an STRA license, that the person has to have their primary residence in Huntsville or Muskoka, so that they're part of the community, as opposed to, we're not here to fund people's retirement dreams from Toronto that want to own properties up here in Huntsville and rent them on Airbnb. I think that would prevent a lot more absentee owners. I don't know if it's legal or allowed, but it's something I just want to know.
Do you get all that?
I wrote some of it down,
Go
so
for it.
we'll see what I can do. I'll go with the STRAs first. I don't believe that we could require them to live here. I know that in the city they do primary and secondary ownership, but a good majority of our STRAs that are on the water, for example, are all secondary units for the owners, and they wouldn't rent them long-term if they were not able to rent them on a short-term basis. So it's something we could look at. I'm not sure what we can do with it, but I can talk to Manager Nagy about that and see what's feasible.
Sure.
From question about the fourplexes, it's an interesting idea. There's a lot of hesitation with my planning hat on about increasing the density to that extent on rural lands when we know that there would be a requirement for ambulances, transit, emergency services, fire department, and all the social services to necessarily have to go to these sites. And it spreads our resources really thin, I guess is where I'm trying to get at. And when we look at all of the competing interests with our climate change declaration and our attempt to reduce greenhouse gases, encouraging more people to live further away from those services is not necessarily, I think, a blanket approval that we could support. However, site-specific circumstances, absolutely, anybody could apply for an amendment, and if they had justification as to why it would be appropriate, I think that would be feasible. If we were looking at trying to ensure one of the units was affordable, I think we would run into some issues because monitoring is one thing, but once they have the approval and they've built 4 units, and then they turn around and say, no, I don't want one to be affordable anymore, we have no recourse to say, well, then you can't rent it, or you don't get to have the 4th unit, or it's hard for us to deal with that sort of a thing. And I know that district has monitoring and a program in place from their MAHEP perspective that they might be able to provide some assistance with that. But it's complicated. I think it's a bit complicated. So
Follow up, Councilor Morrison?
And those are all valid. And those are the reasons we have to be cautious, right? They all make sense. But as a countermeasure to some of those, the monitoring, I think, could be weighed as another comment further down my list of cash in lieu of affordable units. You know, so if someone's going to build a 10-plex and they're not going to make any of them affordable, then they have to contribute a certain dollar amount, 5,000, 2,000, 3,000, to go into a fund, which could help us fund the increment grants if we need funding for the grant, so it doesn't hit the levy. So I think there'd be a way of doing that, or you do a holdback, or like you do with roads, a security. And if they don't end up renting that unit affordable, then you're paying $50,000 or something like that. So there's an incentive to make sure it's affordable. But the other thing about emergency services stuff getting out, the house right across the road from me, it's a monster house. It's probably 4,000 square feet plus a 2-bedroom in-law suite in the basement. It's a 4-bedroom house plus a loft above the garage. They're going to have a lot more potential for emergency calls than a 4-plex with 1-bedroom bachelor units, and we're allowing that. So I don't think that would be a reason to hold off on allowing a 4-plex if we restrict how we build it. And I think now more than, and the climate change thing, there's a lot of data and a lot of stats that a septic and a well is actually better for the environment than our municipal water and sewer infrastructure. It's all gravity fed and it's being used. It's not, and we have so many pumping station and granite here that it's actually better to use a septic and well. So the climate change there, and of course, more cars, more greenhouse gas emissions, I get it, but we're beyond having a housing crisis now. So if that's the only holdup, it wouldn't hold me up from allowing a 4-plex in the rural lands. And we know that with one-bedroom units, it's probably a similar amount of people or less than there would be in the house across the road from me. So I still would like to put forward that we allow fourplexes on rural lands with restrictions and with stuff that the planning staff can support. I still don't see a reason not to do it.
Okay, I do have a list. Your worship.
Thank you, Chair Armour. And I too, like Councillor Morrison, have a whole bunch of things I've been scribbling. So obviously, this is just my first go. I had the same comment about number 1 and 2 with respect to the concierge. I just wasn't sure how anybody on staff would be able to do this on the side. You know, they're already busy, and so I wasn't quite sure how that was going to work. I understand the concept, and I think it's a good concept, but I'm not sure. So let me a few of the others to me are like tick, no brainer. I really liked it, and I really liked your report. Number 4 was the pre-approved SRDU drawings, and that goes back to your point, Helena, that you know, that would just seem like a really good thing to do. And so that covers, you recommend that for semis as well, right?
Yeah.
And then we work with the district and what program, you know, offerings they would have that would marry that, and then we have a great marketing campaign around that. I think that is really good and something we could do. Like, we could just do that, right? So I love that. And I think it was number 9 that was the pre-approved duplexes. I've advocated for the longest time number 8, which is our policy changes like tax incentive financing. And we just recently had a discussion with a developer about the possibility, and it was the first time in ages that I've actually heard a developer say, maybe that would be good. So I don't know why it's, you know, it's not just on us, it's in the development community to say, this would work for us. So I'm not sure what the sticking point is. It's a bit like the head lease. We're not getting traction, but I sure think it's a good offering if we can get them to use it. I think, you know, to Councillor Morrison's comment about the fourplexes in the rural area, as you know, we've had that discussion too. And so I tend to agree. I also, though, will say that I think that Director Maxwell has been moving incrementally. And, you know, because, you know, in this report saying, we're comfortable if someone as of right wanted to build a fourplex in a settlement area, or if a commercial enterprise, and I can think of 1 or 2 off the top of my head, wants to build staff housing. And, you know, I think it was just like a year and a half ago where that we might have had issues or this or that, where we're saying, no, let's not have issues. Let's just make that an as of right. So I think we're sort of moving it incrementally. I would say that as of right in our urban area, as you proposed, again, big check mark, no brainer, let's do it, right? So I guess the other one too is your suggestion around the 25% in new developments, like the larger single-family dwelling developments, to ask that 25% of the new residential units accommodate plans for a secondary suite. Again, Councillor Stone has been raising that for a long time. And to me, I think we should be putting that on the agenda of our developers roundtable and say, this is something we'd really like to just implement, and hear their response, because it makes sense. It just makes sense, even from their perspective, right? So I think we should put the inclusionary zoning 10% on at our next developers meeting. I'd be fascinated to see what they will say on that. I know what happened the last time we considered that, and it involved quite an extensive battle with at least one of the developers. But I think it's worth putting on the developers roundtable agenda. So that is, I think from my perspective, half of what you've suggested in this, I'd love to just pull the trigger and say, yeah, let's do it, make those changes. Yeah.
Excellent.
If I could, Chair Armour,
Absolutely.
in reference to the concierge, I recognize that it is something that could be anticipated would cause more work for staff. In essence, we are doing it to a certain extent currently. It would be more that we would have one of the planners be the specialist in that form of development. So if applications were coming in for multi-res, we would funnel them to a specific person to deal with more than looking at adding additional resources, because I know that that's not really feasible either. But we're doing it to a certain extent, but it would be really helpful, I think, for those developers and for the public to know that if they want to talk about doing this, here's who you need to speak with. So
Can I follow up on that then? May I?
Absolutely, Your Worship.
Thank you. Just a quick, and when you say that, that makes a lot of sense. Would the plan be to remove files from that individual?
if possible, we would. I know Richard is probably grinding his teeth right now, but we would have to recognize though as well that if applications were being delayed because someone's dock permit wasn't going through, that we would need council support with recognizing that some other files may not move as quickly if we were focusing on these specific forms of development first.
Excellent. Councillor Cluchet. Oh, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Armour. Thanks, Kirsten, and great conversation going around the table. I think number 1 and 2, that this is so intertwined with district and funding. It's a perfect opportunity for job share and doing something together. It lends itself to it, like it's purposeful. They're in development of it at district anyway. So how do we incorporate that? So yeah, there's a liaison at each municipality or township, but then the onus is on working together with the district to make it all happen. Then we're not looking at extra staff. We're not taxing any of our planning staff. And I know that our FONA really wants to go and present that district to make that work. It just seems like a really unique opportunity to have a joint effort on it. That's it on that, and that just came to me. So, and I'm wondering why we do the increased setbacks for rural and go to 45%, because we have huge homes. We have in some rural properties, on the size of your lot, there's no limitation to what you can build currently. We're just talking about now building structure that's going to accommodate people. Why do we increase the setbacks?
So this would be specifically for having the 2 units in a detached structure. Yeah. I was thinking truly from a compatibility perspective, that if there's 2 families living in one building, the potential for more noise, more traffic, more just ambient sort of stuff happening, that it would be more appropriate to push it a little further into a lot. Because in the rural area, if we're talking a 5-acre parcel, it didn't have to be nestled right up against the side lot line where there would be a neighbor immediately adjacent. It was more that I thought it would be more appropriate if we push things a little further off.
It might
That's-
create
yeah.
further restrictions on lots where it could happen. Is my only concern. Like, remember, our whole mindset here is to create more opportunity, to create more housing. And I think as soon as you go to setbacks that are greater than the current setbacks, we've again limited our resources here. So I'm not going to argue any further, just making my comment, and I have more. May I continue, Chair Armour?
Can I actually just?
You can absolutely.
Sorry, no, I was just going to suggest that if we increase the setback, say, I think right now it's 7 meters from a side lot line, and if we said it's better to be 10 meters so that there can be a good vegetative buffer between the side lot line and the building, a property owner could always ask for that to be reduced, because they could still go through a class 2 CPP to reduce setbacks for site-specific circumstances. This is to address all circumstances to the best we can, and
Yeah.
that's where the class 2 comes into, that we can narrow it up, because in this instance it's more appropriate to have the building here. We just can't do that as a blanket comfortably necessarily. That's where I was going.
Fair enough.
Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Clark has one, and then we'll come back to you, okay?
Okay, sure.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Armour. I'll just be quick, just one comment really, but I did share Councillor Morrison's concerns about 1 and 2, but I think you've addressed those, so I don't think that's a problem. But I would like to get back to some of the comments about the fourplexes. I think one thing that we could consider is that if we're looking at fourplexes in the rural, because you mentioned you had concerns about the fire department, we could ask that they be sprinklered. We ask that to be done when we approve, homes right now that aren't on year-round roads. That's a requirement. So I think that might be a compromise that could be done, to offset any extra work that the fire department might have to take on. I'm less concerned about ambulance because they're out there anyways on service calls. And like Councillor Morrison said, I mean, some of the houses might be larger than what a fourplex would hold anyways, so.
Thanks for that, Councillor Clark. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, and thanks for that, Councillor Clark and Chair Armour. I have more, but I won't get into it. I'm wondering, to Councillor Morrison's fourplex question, that possibly they have to enter in a MAHIP agreement with no funding, but there's that agreement in place. And then it's covered, it's blanketed. I don't know if you have any input with that.
If I may, I guess, from a planning perspective, regardless of affordability, we're approving multiple residential development in an unserviced location. So that is sort of one side of it. If council feels that the benefit for having these additional units would be because they're required to be affordable, that's something that maybe would provide more opportunity for people. But at the same time, construction, it's not affordable right now. Septic systems and wells are really expensive too. The size of the septic system for a 4-unit development on an unserviced lot would be pretty substantial. There's a lot of planning policy that doesn't support that type of development and that planners really can't support because it's yeah. Can Richard?
I see
jump?
Richard
I was
back
gonna
there
say
waving a
Richard is there
pen.
as my support.
It's all yours,
Just-
Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair Armour. And just to support what Kirsten's pointed out, I do just note that when we did our community planning permit bylaw amendment to allow additional residential dwelling units in the rural area, we actually did get some pushback. So there was a lot of concern about servicing, and people were concerned about, some rural residential lots are not actually that big. So we do have to be careful about how many units we're allowing in some of those areas. Some of those could be within rural residential subdivisions, for example, like Woodland Heights. So there are some concerns out there about having more than 3 units already. So I think maybe how it's been pointed out already, baby steps, maybe that's a good concept with respect to these additional residential units in the rural area. And we have gone beyond what a lot of other municipalities have done already. So that's something I think council can be proud of. So I just wanted to make sure that history, we've already tried pushing the envelope. We've been successful at making progress, but there was some concerns when we did 3 units. So I just wanted to point that out.
Councillor Morrison, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I totally get that, and that makes sense. And that's why I think I hinted that there should be certain size lots, right? If somebody has 5 acres and they want to build 2 fourplexes on 2.5 acres each, no one's going to see those buildings. No one's going to be impacted by those buildings. And you say push the envelope. I think now's the time to push the envelope more. Like rewind the clock 10 years and imagine if we did it back then, how many more people would be housed in our community. The current process of allowing like 3 units, so you could have a 3-bedroom home with a 3-bedroom apartment in the basement and a 2-bedroom accessory unit for 8 bedrooms. But we're not going to be willing to consider 4 1-bedroom units. It doesn't add up. I really want 4plexes in rural areas with restrictions. And I know it's hard for planning staff to support it, and that's their job, but it's our job to get people housed. And I'm not going to let a couple little arguments prevent that from happening. And we do know from our bonus report and people like Steve, Hernan and Ken Oben, that the small units are what everybody needs. And talking about people in improper housing, there's people in 2 and 3 bedroom houses that can't afford it because they can't find anything else. If we get, imagine 4 1-bedroom, imagine like seniors, young people, professionals living in these 4 1-bedroom units on a property that's not intrusive, taking those people that only need 1-bedroom units out of the rental pool for 2 and 3 bedroom units, more families can actually get 2 and 3 bedroom units. There's so much upside and there's not enough downside at all, in my opinion. So sorry to hammer on that, but I really think it's important that we push that through.
No, I can totally understand. I'm sure everybody does, but when it comes to like the infrastructure for these buildings, septics and wells, et cetera, could be very expensive. So it might not be affordable for the builder development, but be them to figure out. Mayor Elcock.
Thank you, Chair Armour. If I may, I'm just going to follow up on this because I think it's really important, and I do think that there's a lot of support, as part of this discussion. And when you look at the 2 that we're already at 3, right? And to your point, Councillor Morrison, so really the debate is around 3 to 4. And I can imagine in your head, you're saying, well, it could be 4, it could be 2 times 4 or whatever, as soon as we cross that divide. But it really, I tend to agree. I think we need to look at this and look at it through the planning lens. I think sometimes the figure that always comes up when we look at this is that we already have approved 1,000 lots in the rural area. How many of those were approved 2 decades ago? And so we keep coming back to those that they're sort of over here. Really, what we're trying to deal with is current approvals, people who want to do things now. And we still need, and that's in 1 or 2 of our reports, how we're trying to clean up those old approvals. But I think as long as we're trying to clean those up, they shouldn't be part of our equation about existing approved lots, right? Because nothing's happening to those. And the other is, it was raised earlier by Councillor Morrison about the necessary approvals for capacity within our urban areas. And that's a really important point, right? I know we're trying to direct it to the urban areas. That's where growth, that's what our OP, the district's OP, and all of it. We know that. But what was very clear at CAPS was when we start implementing our growth plan targets with the lower tier, unless we have an intensification plan or secondary plan to support the developments in our urban areas where we're going to do a lot of housing, different types of housing, multis, all of the things we're supposed to do, we're probably not going to get the approvals on capacity. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to get those approvals. We need them. But that means we have to churn out a secondary plan, Richard, like in maybe by 2 weeks from now, in order tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow. But so I look at that and I know we're going to do it. I get that. But I think, connecting to services is really expensive too. So, and I'm not saying that building quads in our rural area will answer the affordable housing issue, but I just look at it and think I think it's important that we need to look at it through a planning lens and say, this is okay. To the comment about sprinkler systems. Yep, for sure. That addresses part of it. And, it will be in areas that are considered rural areas where there's already development, right? And to the point of we approve monster homes that have 8 bedrooms and cajillions of washrooms. So maybe not a cajillion, but whatever. I just think that if we look at it through that lens, that it's not as blasphemous from a planning perspective as we think it is. So I'm sort of in the direction of a couple of our other councillors on this one.
Councillor Cluchet.
Thank you, Chair. Big thing here too, we're talking about, the size of septic systems, the size of footprints. We don't know the size of the footprint, the size of the septic system. We're trying to make decisions here. We're saying, we should, we shouldn't, but maybe we should find out exactly the size of a footprint of a fourplex that can be built affordably, and what size of septic system. I see these gajillion washrooms in these houses, and there's a septic system between the house and the lake. And the septic system isn't any bigger than the hole in the center here. All the new type of weeper beds and systems that are out now, the technology's changed a lot in them. It's not the old traditional big 8-run beds anymore, you know? So I think maybe we should do some homework and find out exactly what it takes to put this in the rural areas before we, you know, say we should or we shouldn't.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because when you think about it, you build a 4-bedroom home, you need a certain size septic, but I guess if you're building 4 apartments, you may need washers and dryers, et cetera, in every apartment that you have to be more concerned about, right? Councillor Schumacher.
Thank you, through you, Chair Armour. Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with the rural area concept, at least to look at it. Like, that's the whole point. We're kind of examining it. Our official plan is coming up for review. I mean, we're going to go to the public too. We're going to get some consults from them as far as that goes. So I'm totally on board. I mean, I wanted secondary units at least, you know, 2 family dwellings on a place. So how is that much different than maybe, say, a 4-plex where it's even more combined and together? So I'm willing to sort of look at that. And to when I know number 19 isn't on yours, and you're talking about, you know, climate and whatnot. The expansion of transit, we just had a presentation yesterday at accessibility. So we are looking at options. The district is piloting their project in Gravenhurst with DTR or DRT. And we have like 2 stops in Port Sydney right now with the Corridor 11 bus. So I think there is ways to transition people from, you know, at least the Port Sydney, you know, Utterson area into town, and still look at our footprint from a climate action perspective. So I'd be open to that. I guess my only question around wells is, has much changed since, I guess, Walkerton? I know when I was trying to push for 2 buildings, it maybe had to be 2 separate wells. If we did a 4-plex, would it have to be 4? It could just be the one, and then we don't have to fall into that category, correct? Yeah. Don't know.
Just on another note, if you were to just drive up to Novar, there's a 4-plex up there just across that runs off a septic and well. So, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor Armour. I just, like, the 4-plexes, I guess the thing is, the question is, would a developer even build them? You know, that's the real question, because we know, like, a well is 30 to 40 grand now to put in. A septic system for a 4-plex, you know, probably 50 to 100 grand, depending on what's required. So the real question is, you know, we can talk about it all we want around here, but the real question is anybody even going to build them? You know, that's the question. And it is, like Councillor Morrison alluded to, well, it'd be up to the developer to figure it out. And I guess it would be. So a lot of this conversation might be for nothing, right?
Yeah, we're definitely beating up the 4-plexes. So we're going to shut this down soon. We're going to have Councillor Fitzgerald go, and then we'll move on.
It's going around so much. There's things I'm forgetting, I want to say. Yeah, if you allow them to do it, they'll build it. Like, I think of Port Sydney, there's 4-plexes in Port Sydney, boom, boom, squares this high. And then there's other apartments that are 4-plexes, 5-plexes. As soon as you get into over 5 on well, you're involved with the MOE and separate water purification. As far as the septics go, it's determined by what type of system and what type of soil and everything else. So I think if we provide the opportunity, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't happen. But we have to remember that not everyone wants to live in town, and there's other things happening outside of town in some of our special areas and there will be big things. So we need people to be housed there because maybe they don't have transportation, but what if they work there? So not everyone wants to live in the core. They need to provide opportunities to live in the Valley or Port Sydney or Utterson, because more things are coming to those areas, more employment and more opportunities. So I don't think we limit it by us deciding what people's options are. That we need to provide all options.
Okay. New subject or wait, the new subject? Mayor Alcock.
Yes, I won't add any more to that last one. You mentioned parking, and I think that makes, again, there were so many things in here that just make so much sense. And for some reason, I don't know why, but the reduction to one space per unit, I keep thinking we've already done that. But if we haven't, I think we should, because we keep saying on a number of applications, yes, we approve that. And so that just makes a lot of sense to me too, so I wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think we reduced parking on Goldie Street for the,
And we've done it actually, I think, a few times, right? So it kind of, just makes sense to me.
absolutely. Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Armour, and excellent discussion around the table. Mike, I'm saying that truthfully. Councillor Fitzgerald. Yeah. I guess my question or my comment is that you haven't really looked at, or you didn't look at and it was an excellent report, but there has been discussion in the next 10 years, the tsunami of boomers that are going to, you mentioned that a lot of people are over 60, that those people who now live in large homes are going to end up going into maybe long-term care or homes. Will there not be availability in the market, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe more, that we just haven't predicted yet, or that we know it's coming, but we just don't know what kind of housing we're going to have in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, because seniors are downsizing and then those homes become available. My mother lives in a home by herself, and it was the family home. We had 5 people living in it, and she's in there, and she's in her 80s. In a few years, she's not going to be there anymore. So there's so many people like that are going to be downsizing. So I don't know if there's a question in there or more of a comment, but you did allude to the fact that our population is aging, and that will affect our housing, I think, eventually. So
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Renwick. The district does a second home study as well every few years, and they look at whether or not the second houses are staying as second houses because people buy a cottage and then they end up retiring there, but then they end up moving out, and then it goes back to being a cottage again, and it's kind of cyclical for those ones. For us, our market housing, and I know that our councillors that are more experienced in that side of things will recognize it. We have a lot of new people moving to Huntsville that scoop up our market housing pretty quickly because they have more resources, because they're selling something that's worth more and coming here. So I don't know that it gives us more opportunity, but that's also why we need to look at the rental side of things and increasing the number of rental units that we have, because that is definitely, it's very cyclical. So.
a very quick follow-up. Do we see in our community investors that are coming just to buy the homes and not live in them, but just buy them as investments as opposed to using them for families or for actually living in? Does that occur? I should know that, but I don't.
We do and we don't. We do for short-term rental to a certain extent. There was a bit of a boom during COVID for that as well. But the majority of people that are buying properties are using them occasionally. Yeah.
Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I can speak to that too. There are, and as Corey would tell you as well, if you talk to Dave Goodfellow or Andy Kidd, there is a percentage of people buying homes that plan on moving here 5 years from now, 7 years from now, but they buy at today's value, rent it out long term, and then they take it over. So it works well. I think I want to, obviously we have a good debate about what should and shouldn't happen, but I want to really hope the message that comes out of today is just how impactful the measures that Kirsten and Richard and the team have taken, how impactful that's going to be in our community. When Richard says stuff that we can be proud of, that's what I want to focus on. This is huge. Like, this document has so many great ideas, and I can speak to all the things I love about it. And what I want to just point out, Kirsten done some digging into the renoviction thing, and we're going to keep that on the radar. And I really think that down the road, if Hamilton, if it works out with Hamilton, something we can look at, because I know of people that have been kicked out for a renovation, turns out to be just a bathroom reno, which doesn't meet the standard. So I think there are people being kicked out that were paying $900 a month in rent and not even being told that they have the right to move back in after the renovations are done. So that's more the reason we discussed it, Kirsten and I think that's going to stay on our radar. But I just want to reiterate how much I love this report and how impactful it's going to be.
I think this is perfect opportunity for me to say, what are the next steps? What are our next steps going forward?
So, thank you. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. What we will do is work on the policy changes. So all of the policy changes will require public meetings, obviously the bylaw and official plan changes. What I anticipate we would do is bring forward a report to council with the details of each potential or each suggested revision. And then we would go out and provide notice of public hearing and go from there for those planning specific ones. For the other options, I'll work with the staff that will be helping me on some of these items, like the STRA bylaw and the marketing team, about getting those short-term or the building plans and the expression of interest and all that stuff. We'll do that as soon as we can.
Excellent. Your worship?
Thank you. And I just to follow up on that, and I appreciate that. So do you feel that you've had enough direction today that some of these things, I mean, to Councillor Morrison and others have said, there's a lot of really good stuff here. And I think some of it is just like a no-brainer. And let's bring something forward. Do you feel you've got some of that direction?
Yes, I do. So for the 17 items that council is comfortable moving forward with, we will report back on what it looks like for fourplexes in the rural area as well as part of that, whichever planning direction report we're bringing. So if there's other items that I've missed, I don't.
So
Your worship, go ahead.
just a quick, yeah, sorry, things like the pre-approved drawings. So we didn't have a lot of discussion around that. So I'm assuming you'll be bringing, sort of the next step might be, there seemed to be some positive feedback on this. This is what it would look like going forward. Is that's sort of, I don't want to bog it down, but I'm just sort of curious what
No, absolutely. I mean, if I could just go out and do it based on the detail in the report currently, that if council is satisfied with the size of the units, we could look at a few more options in consultation with the building department, but we can implement those if council's happy based on the recommendation that is in the report, I think. So
Yeah, that'd be excellent. Councillor Morrison?
And I'll close with my last question. The one thing I love, because we talked about affordability, who will build these units, can we incentivize the tax increment grant that you've come up with? I think could be a game changer, because it's going to incentivize people to have less overhead for the first so many years. I wonder, you said we would have to make it up through the levy. Is there a way that you could just forego those taxes and not have to repay it through the levy, or does it have to be topped up through the levy? And the second question I would have, just because it's the same theme, is we talked about cash in lieu of affordable units, or our rural severance policy, if we're going to allow more severances. Could we find a way to have affordable housing, don't want to say the word tax, a levy or a bit of a stipend that goes in to fund the increment financing if we have to do it through the levy?
Director McKenzie?
I was trying to follow through what your request was. Was it whether we have to, like whether we can just cancel the taxes? Is that what you're saying, or
Yeah, because if it's being,
as opposed to a
if it's a
rebate?
grant, do we still have to have something in the budget from the levy, or can we just forego those taxes for those years and not have to replace it with the levy money?
Okay, that is what I thought you were asking. We still would have to tax them. We can't cancel their taxes, so we would have to cancel it, and then we would have to have another funding source for that. So we would have to fund those rebates.
So could it be possible that, let's say it's Helena's apartment building that she has, and it's 4,000 in taxes, she pays the taxes and then we reimburse, as opposed to the general levy that the general taxpayer paying? Okay, cool.
Deferral?
Okay, because otherwise, if you're taxing them and you're not getting any revenue, the rest of the taxpayers have to make it up, is what you're saying. Okay, yeah.
I'm sure you were. So is a little quiet around here. CEO would like to have the last word.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I think it's really just important to reiterate that staff are very aware how important housing is to our council and to our community. And they have come back with recommendations that they feel they can carry out with the existing resources, because we also know that's a challenge. But it does mean that something will have to be delayed somewhere down the line. So I really think it's important that we have council support, very focused on housing initiatives, and that's what our teams brought forward. So with your support, we can absolutely make this happen.
Fabulous. So with that, should I call the question, or would you like me to read the motion again? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Great discussion, everyone. So with that, the mayor is going to resume the chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Armour, for doing a fantastic job chairing that really, that excellent discussion. So we don't have anything in closed, we don't have any business arising. So I have one motion. It has been moved by Councillor Renwick, seconded by Councillor Schumacher. It is recommended that we do now adjourn at 3:01 p.m. Questions or comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, everybody. And Kirsten, thank you for a really great report today.